Today I'll be talking about the governmental child migration policy of England. My main focus will be on the child migrants that are exported to Australia and what happened to them. The child migrant policy began in the 1860s and continued for a century. The policy saw over 100,000 children sent to the countries of the Commonwealth from England. These countries included Canada, Zimbabwe, New Zealand, and finally Australia. The scheme was supported by both the Australian and British governments. Children were often called the best migrants in the post-World War II era, as they seemed to adapt easily. Also, they had a long working life ahead and could be cheaply housed in dormitory-style accommodation. Approximately 10,000 children, some as young as 3 years old, were sent to Australia between 1947 and 1967. The idea was to take these children out of the poverty-stricken, overflowing British orphanages and take the kids to a better life in Australia. The other benefits for the Australian government was that they could restock our population with cheap labour, and it also worked conveniently in step with the White Australia policy. The children were told that Australia was a great place, and that they could pick fruit off the trees whilst riding on horseback to school, and that the sun shines all year round. But when the children arrived to Australia, they realised that the reality was much, much different. The child migrants were put aboard ships with no passports, social histories, or even the most basic documents like birth certificates. Few were real orphans. Many came from families that could not care for them anymore. Many of these children were removed without their parents' consent or knowledge. Once they arrived at the docks, brothers and sisters were often separated and sent to institutions in different parts of the country. Some were loaded onto the backs of trucks for long journeys to institutions in remote regions, only to be put to hard work the very next day. Many felt an extreme sense of rejection by the family and their country of origin. The policy stated that these children would be well cared for, fed, sheltered, clothed, and educated. This did not occur in most cases, as they had little food, bare clothing, they were put to hard work, suffered harsh discipline, and had little or no education. The tragic reality was appalling standards of care which fell well below accepted standards found in British institutions. Some were involved in construction works without adequate food or basic safety messages. The lives of these children changed dramatically and their fortunes varied. Some succeeded in creating new futures, whilst others suffered lonely and brutal childhoods. All experienced separation from their family and the homeland. An apology by the Australian government to the Forgotten Australians in 2009 shone the spotlight on this shameful part of our history. Few people cannot even fathom what these children went through. I would like to introduce my nonno, who is a former child migrant who arrived to Australia in 1954. He has kindly agreed to answer some questions on the subject. First question. How old were you when you were put in the orphanage in England?
I was around 5 years old, actually, yeah.
As a child, what did you think happened to your mother after she put you in the orphanage in England?
I remember my mother leaving me in the orphanage. I always reckon it was the worst day of my life. I believed she would come back for me because that is what she told me. And in answer to your question, no, I never saw my mother again. We were told so often that we were orphans that I started to believe it.
Did you have any siblings, and were you separated?
Yes, I had a brother and 2 sisters, and we were separated in England, and then only I was sent to Australia. I eventually met them again when I was in my middle age.
As an adult, what have you discovered about your mother's situation at the time she placed you into care?
I understand now that things were very hard for my mother. My father had died, so she was left with 4 kids under the age of 5 to care for on her own. She had no family support. There was little or no government assistance in those days. It was post-World War II. She was very poor, uneducated and unemployed. So she placed us into care until she could get back on her feet. She always intended to visit and come back and collect us. And sometimes she did visit, apparently. I found out much, much later. But the nuns told her it was better that she didn't see me, as it only upset me to see her. So I never ever saw her. I just felt abandoned by her.
I tend to. Also, did you make contact with her once you found out she was alive in England?
I tentatively contacted her, but after so many years had passed and thinking that she had deserted me, we couldn't really get it together before she died soon after.
Were you angry with the authorities that sent you to Australia without your family's consent?
Yes, there is a deep-seated anger at the British government for making this decision for us. Their actions caused me to hate and be angry at my mother. They exported me, to a harsh, brutal life and didn't do anything about it. Yes, I am angry at the authorities.
How did you feel once you found out that your mother had actually came back to the orphanage to collect you, just to find that you were gone?
I didn't find this out until after my mother had died. My mother did not know that I had been sent to Australia, so I asked the question, how could these people make these decisions for themselves?
Why did the authorities choose you then, even though they knew that you had a mother and three siblings, alive and well in England?
No one seems to know why certain kids were chosen. So not long ago I met a man a couple of years ago who was in the next bed to mine in the orphanage in England. He tells me he wondered why he that he didn't go and why I went, because he was an orphan in the true sense of the word. So it really doesn't make sense.
Once you were chosen to go to Australia, how old were you, and what did you think was going to happen? What did they tell you about Australia?
I was like 9 when I left for Australia on a ship. I was excited about going to Australia. I was told we would ride horses to school, to be able to pick fruit straight from the trees, and the sun shone all the time. And it is the most beautiful place in the world.
What happened when you arrived after your long journey to Fremantle?
It was exciting to arrive at Fremantle. Our guardian dressed us up in our best clothes. We stepped out into the wharf full of exciting expectations. We were picked up by a very stern-looking, gruff Christian brother, and it all went downhill from there. We were loaded onto the back of a truck with the refuse collected from different businesses for the pigs to a place called Boys Town in Bindoon. In those days, a place in remote bushland.
Once you arrived at the orphanage in Bindoon, what happened to you?
We were lined up, told to remove all our clothes and put them on our cases. We were given a khaki shirt, a pair of khaki shorts, no shoes or socks, and they took away our cases and clothes. We were also given a number. Mine was number 148. It didn't occur to me at the time, but I see it now. They stole my identity. We had no paperwork to show who we were, where we were born, nothing. We came out, no passports, nothing.
Please describe some of the conditions at the orphanage in Australia, and how it differed to what you have been told, and how it differed from the orphanage in England.
Well, the first day we had to report to what I thought was school. It turned out we all had to go out into the bush and collect rocks for the buildings. I soon found out we didn't have a school, but we were going to build it. For the first couple of years they had what they called an orphan's birthday, which was June the 1st. Boys Town was nothing like what I'd been used to in England. When we got food it was terrible. The masters were cruel, they seemed to look for any reason to beat you, and we had to work all the time. I worked there until I was 16. We all had to leave then and go out to the world and find our way.
Did you ever go to school again?
School was rare. We would do a day and then carry bricks and collect rocks and collect firewood or work on the farm. There always seemed to be something else to do. I worked on the farm and in the orchard.
So, based on what you know now, do you feel that the British and Australian governments fulfilled what the policy promised?
I feel both governments failed the children completely. We were not looked after well. We had no academic education at all. We worked as slave labour, we were abused mentally and physically, and we were definitely not loved as children should be.
That was the last question. Thank you for talking to me, Nonno.
Thank you, Liam.